They say you can't judge a book by its cover, but what if I told you that in the first 3 seconds of meeting someone, your subconscious already has 3 seconds, 3 signals, 3 invisible truths that reveal more about a person than an hour of conversation ever could. Yet most of us ignore them. We smile, we nod, we engage in polite small talk, while the real language, the truth behind the eyes, the tension in the jaw, the flicker of discomfort passes us by. What if those 3 seconds are not just a moment, but a map? A map of pain, of pride, of fear, of everything a person hides and everything they cannot stop revealing. Because here's the hidden reality. Human beings are not that mysterious. We are patterned. We are predictable. And Nietzsche, the sharp-eyed philosopher, often mistaken for just another name in a dusty textbook, saw through those patterns like a surgeon. He believed people wear masks not to lie, but to survive. That behind every act of kindness, there may be a shadow. Behind every loud voice, a fragile heart. And that the truth, our real truth, is always leaking out through the cracks. This video is not about learning tricks or cold reading hacks. It is about seeing through illusion, through performance, through the layers of projection, fear, and memory that shape every word and movement. This is not about others only. It's about you too. Because the better you read people, the more clearly you will see your own reflection staring back at you. Nietzsche's 18 psychological truths are not guidelines. They are revelations. They will change how you perceive people. They will unsettle you. And by the time you hear the final one, you may begin to question your own assumptions about others and about yourself. Some of these truths will feel familiar, like echoes of thoughts you've always had but never dared to say out loud. Others will cut deep, exposing the subtle lies we tell every day just to keep functioning. But all of them are real. All of them are based not on optimism, but on unfiltered human nature. By the end of this video, you won't just understand people better, you'll recognize their patterns instantly. That confident executive? You'll notice the mask. That overly kind acquaintance? You'll hear the hidden resentment. That silent figure in the room? You'll sense the storm beneath their stillness. And when we get to the final truth, truth number 18, you may realize something even more unsettling. That the person you thought you knew best, the one you've seen in the mirror every day, has been hiding something from you all along. This is not about judgment. It's about clarity. And clarity, as Nietzsche knew, is power. So take a breath. Look around and ask yourself, what have you missed in the last 3 seconds? Because everything you need to know about someone is already in front of you. Now, let us begin by peeling off the very first mask. Truth 1. Everyone wears a mask. To survive. Every person you meet is wearing a mask. Not always to deceive you, but simply to survive. Imagine a soldier stepping into battle without armor. That's what walking through life feels like without a mask. We learn to put it on early. Some learn to smile when they want to scream. Others speak softly when rage fills their chest. Some pretend to care, to fit in, to belong. And the irony is, the more fragile someone is on the inside, the more convincing the mask becomes. Nietzsche understood this long before the age of filters and fake smiles. He saw society not as a gathering of individuals, but as a masquerade and endless performance. The polite man at work, the affectionate neighbor, the charming woman at the party, each plays a role. Not because they're liars, but because the truth is often too dangerous to expose. Vulnerability is risky, honesty costly. So instead, we wear a face that fits the world's expectations, not our own reality. But here's the catch. The mask never fits perfectly. It shifts, it slips, it leaves gaps. And through those gaps, the real person leaks out. in the way they overcompensate, in the way they suddenly fall silent, in the way their eyes contradict their words. If you know what to look for, the mask becomes obvious not in its presence, but in its imperfections. Pay attention to the person who's always joking. Sometimes humor is a fortress, a last defense. Look at the one who always agrees, always smiles, always supports. Are they afraid of rejection? Are they desperate to belong? The question isn't whether someone is wearing a mask. The real question is what wound are they hiding beneath it? Because no one wears a mask without a reason. And often, the brighter the mask shines, the darker the truth it's hiding. This truth is not cynical, it's compassionate. When you realize everyone is protecting something, you stop taking things personally. That rude tone, that cold shoulder, that fake compliment, they may have nothing to do with you. They may be the shield someone needed to get through the day. The mask is not the enemy. It is the survival instinct made visible. But if you want to read someone, truly read them, you must look not at the mask, but through it. Watch the moments when their mask cracks. That's when the truth speaks. And that's only the beginning. Because the next truth reveals that what people hate most in others is often what they fear most within themselves. Truth 2, what someone hates in others, reveals what they're hiding. When someone speaks with disgust, when they point fingers, when they criticize harshly, it often has less to do with the target and more to do with the mirror. Nietzsche believed that hatred is projection in disguise. That what we attack in others often reflects a part of ourselves we refuse to accept. Think about it. The person who loudly condemns arrogance may secretly crave admiration. The one who shames others for seeking attention might be aching to be seen. We project what we deny. We shame what we secretly struggle with. And the more aggressively someone calls it out, the more likely it's a confession in camouflage. This is not always conscious. In fact, most projection is unconscious. The person isn't lying. They genuinely believe they're fighting injustice or bad behavior. But their intensity, their obsession, their emotional charge, those are clues. Because true clarity speaks quietly. Projection screams. Imagine a man who cannot tolerate weakness in others. He mocks, belittles, or avoids anyone who shows vulnerability. But beneath that reaction may lie a childhood where weakness was punished, where crying was shameful, where survival meant pretending to be strong. So now, as an adult, every glimpse of weakness in another feels unbearable, because it reminds him of the part of himself he buried long ago. Projection is like a shadow that follows us. We may walk toward the light, but the parts we don't want to face stretch out behind us, coloring how we see the world. When someone's judgment seems out of proportion, when their anger feels exaggerated, that is the moment to ask, what are they really fighting? Who are they really angry at? Often, they are fighting themselves. And if you want to read someone, really understand what drives them, you must look at their criticisms not as facts, but as maps. Maps of unresolved conflict. Maps of pain in hiding. What they hate reveals what they fear. What they condemn reveals what they have not yet accepted in their own soul. This truth does not only apply to others, it applies to us. The next time you feel a sharp reaction to someone's behavior, pause. Ask yourself, what part of me feels threatened? What am I denying? Because the things that trigger us often point to the very truths we've buried deep. And now we move to a different kind of revelation. Not the words people say, but the silence they leave behind. Truth 3, silence reveals more than words. We've been taught to listen to what people say, but Nietzsche knew better. He listened to what they didn't say, because in the gaps between words, in the stillness after a question, in the breath someone holds before answering truth often lives there, Quiet and undisturbed. Silence is not empty. It's full of signals. Sometimes it's fear holding its breath. Sometimes it's a scream swallowed by habit. And sometimes it's a boundary, a final wall, protecting what someone cannot bear to reveal. Imagine this. You ask someone how. They feel, and they pause, just a second too long. Then they say they're fine. That pause? That's where the real answer was. Their words only told you what they wanted you to believe. But their silence told you what they didn't want to admit. Not even to themselves. In many ways, silence is like a fog. It doesn't block the truth. It softens it, blurs it, hides it just enough to make you wonder. But if you're paying attention, if you listen with more than your ears, the fog clears. You begin to see what others miss. The slight tension in the jaw, the eyes that avoid contact, the breath that quickens then disappears. There's a difference between someone being quiet and someone being silent. Quiet is peace, silence is resistance. And that resistance is often a response to something raw, something unspoken, unresolved, or deeply painful. Some people go silent to avoid conflict, others to avoid exposure. But either way, silence is never just silence. Nietzsche saw silence as a confession without language, a non-verbal plea for space, for understanding, or for protection. And often, the louder the world gets, the more meaningful silence becomes. Because in a culture obsessed with talking, silence stands out. It signals depth. It demands presence. So, the next time someone goes quiet, don't rush to fill the space. Don't panic. Don't assume disinterest or disrespect. Instead, lean in. Notice. Let the silence speak. You might hear shame. You might hear fear. You might even hear longing. But only if you're willing to listen beyond the noise. And if silence reveals the things we hide, what does exaggerated virtue try to prove? The next truth takes us into the realm of moral performance and what it really says about the person delivering it. Truth 4. Excessive virtue is often disguised vanity. We admire goodness. We celebrate kindness. But Nietzsche warns us, when someone flaunts their morality too brightly, too often, too loudly, it may not be virtue at all. It may be vanity in disguise. There's a difference between being good and needing to be seen as good. The first comes from the soul. The second comes from the ego. The person who truly lives with integrity rarely needs to announce it. But the one who constantly reminds others of how honest, humble, or righteous they are, that person might be polishing a mask, not living a truth. It's a subtle shift. A helpful person who quietly supports others acts from compassion. But the one who posts their every good deed, who repeats stories of their own generosity, who subtly compares themselves to those less enlightened, they may not be serving others. They may be serving their own image. Nietzsche saw this not as hypocrisy, but as insecurity. He believed people exaggerate their virtue when they are uncertain of their value. When you doubt your worth, you compensate. And morality becomes a stage, a place to perform, a place to be applauded, not to grow. This kind of performance is dangerous, not because it harms others directly, but because it hides the truth from the self. The performer begins to believe their own act. They mistake applause for authenticity. And soon, they can no longer tell the difference. But if you're watching closely, you'll see the cracks. The moral superiority, it slips into contempt, the forced compassion that turns cold when unappreciated, the generosity that demands to be recognized. These are not signs of true virtue. They are signals of a person seeking validation through goodness. And that need reveals something fragile beneath the surface, a self not yet rooted, a person building their identity not from who they are, but from how they want to be seen. The more they need you to know they are good, the less they may actually believe it themselves. So if you want to read someone, don't just listen to their values. Watch how they express them. Is it quiet, steady, humble? Or is it loud, polished, rehearsed? Because when morality becomes a performance, it's no longer about truth, it's about protection. And sometimes, what we're protecting is the fear that we're not enough. But this performance doesn't just deceive others. It deceives the self. And that brings us to the next truth. People don't start by lying to you. They start by lying to themselves. Truth 5. People don't lie to you first. They lie to themselves. Most of us think deception begins outward, that people decide to lie and then aim it at others. But Nietzsche flips this idea on its head. He believed that self-deception is the origin of almost every falsehood we encounter. Before someone lies to you, they've already told that lie to themselves over and over until it feels real. It doesn't begin with malice. It begins with need. A need to be seen a certain way. A need to avoid guilt. A need to hold on to a fragile identity. And so, people rewrite the story in their minds. They soften the edges. They shift the blame. They filter out the parts they can't bear to admit. Slowly, the story becomes a script, and they start to believe it. The man who cheats but calls it a mistake. The friend who abandons you but says it was for your good. The colleague who takes credit but insists it was teamwork. These are not just lies, they are internal justifications turned outward. The most convincing liars are not actors. They are believers. They believe the story they've created because the alternative is too painful. Nietzsche saw this not with judgment, but with clarity. He knew the human mind is not built for truth. It's built for survival. And sometimes, survival means distorting reality just enough to keep moving forward. We all do it in small ways. We tell ourselves we're fine when we're breaking. We say we don't care when we're hurting. We label our choices as rational when they were born from fear. When reading people, this truth matters deeply. Because what looks like manipulation may actually be self-preservation. What seems like dishonesty may be the final layer of a long chain of internal lies. And the more emotionally charged the story is, the more likely it's protecting something. Underneath shame, regret, fear, grief. So how do you spot this? Look at the disconnect between someone's words and their energy. Do they sound certain but seem uneasy? Are they trying too hard to explain, to justify, to be understood? That's a clue. The lie might not be meant for you. It might be a script. They've been performing for themselves for years. And when people lie to themselves long enough, they forget the truth entirely. But their body remembers. Their eyes hesitate. Their tone cracks. Their timing slips. Because the truth, no matter how buried, wants to surface. And when it does, it often reveals something deeper. That superiority, that confidence, that moral certainty, it may be hiding the very opposite. And that leads us to the next truth. Where someone feels most superior is often where they feel most small. Truth 6. Where someone feels superior, they're hiding inferiority. Confidence is not always confidence. Sometimes it's camouflage. When someone speaks with absolute certainty, when they look down on others, when they dominate conversations, correct everyone, or carry themselves like they are untouchable, Nietzsche would tell you to look again. Because where there is superiority, there is often a wound beneath it. Superiority is rarely about being better. It's often about feeling less and compensating for it. The person who constantly proves their intelligence might be haunted by past humiliation. The one who brags about wealth might still carry the shame of once having nothing. The one who dominates others may feel powerless inside. When a person feels inferior in some deep, invisible way, they often try to bury it beneath dominance, status, or performance. But here's the twist. This mask of superiority isn't just for others, it's for themselves. It's a story they need to believe. A defense mechanism against the pain of inadequacy. They project strength to silence. The voice inside that whispers, "You're not enough." Nietzsche saw through this dance. He understood that the loudest arrogance often points to the deepest insecurity. It's not about ego, it's about survival. In a world that rewards confidence and punishes weakness, people learn to fake strength, not to deceive, but to protect. To be weak is to be vulnerable, and for many, that's unacceptable. You'll notice this pattern in people who constantly compare, who turn every conversation into a contest, who feel the need to correct, compete, or control. These aren't signs of true confidence. True confidence is quiet, steady, grounded. False superiority is noisy, restless, and desperate to be seen. And when you encounter it, instead of reacting with resentment, try curiosity. What are they defending? What are they afraid someone might discover? Because when you realize superiority is often a shield for pain, you begin to see people not as threats, but as complex beings trying to heal through illusion. And now, having peeled back the layers of masks, projection, silence, performance, self-deception, and superiority, we arrive at a turning point. You've seen how people hide. Now, get ready to hear what fear sounds like when it takes control. We are stepping into the second chamber of the mind, where fear echoes louder than reason. We've uncovered the masks people wear, the ways they hide pain behind pride, lies behind belief, and silence behind strength. But masks alone don't explain everything. Beneath them is something older, deeper, and far more powerful. Fear. It doesn't always scream, it doesn't always show its teeth, but it shapes nearly every word, gesture, and decision. If you want to truly read someone, you need to hear what fear is whispering behind their words. In this next chapter, we dive into the quiet dictator of the human mind, the hidden fears that drive us all. Truth 7. Most actions are driven by unconscious fear. Fear rarely introduces itself. It doesn't show up wearing a name tag or raise its hand in conversation. Instead, it operates in shadows. It disguises itself as logic, as caution, as ambition, even as love. But make no mistake, fear is the invisible string that pulls the limbs of nearly every human action. Nietzsche saw it not as weakness, but as the quiet architect of the soul. He believed most people are not choosing their lives freely. They're reacting. Reacting to wounds they can't name. Reacting to memories they've buried. Reacting to the ancient fear of not being enough, of being rejected, of being forgotten. A man might chase power, not because he loves power, but because he fears insignificance. A woman might stay silent in meetings, not because she lacks ideas, but because she fears being judged. People avoid risk, avoid love, avoid truth, not because they don't want those things, but because somewhere inside them is a voice whispering, "It's not safe." Fear does not need to shout. It pulls quietly. It redirects choices. It twists desires. It builds cages that look like comfort. And because so much of it happens unconsciously, people don't even realize they're not living. They're protecting. This is why so many people feel stuck, confused, or unfulfilled. They make decisions based on what makes sense, but that sense is fear in disguise. They choose security over passion, control over vulnerability, routine over risk, and then wonder why life feels flat. If you want to read someone deeply, ask yourself this: what are they trying to avoid? What emotion do they never express? What situation do they always sidestep? Their fear will not be loud. It will be subtle. But once you see it, everything else makes sense. Look at the person who never opens up. That might not be pride. It might be the fear of being abandoned if they're fully known. Look at the one who's always achieving, always proving. That might not be confidence. It might be fear of worthlessness and stillness. Fear is the invisible thread woven through people's lives. And once you begin to trace it, you see that most people aren't truly living out desires. They're avoiding threats. Even if those threats exist only in memory, not in the next truth, we look at how that fear doesn't just hide, it reflects outward. It takes the form of criticism, not as truth, but as a mirror for pain. Truth 8. Criticism is a mirror. When someone criticizes you harshly, instinct tells you to defend yourself, to push back, to analyze whether what they said is true. But Nietzsche challenges us to ask a deeper question. What does this criticism reveal about them? Criticism is rarely neutral. It almost always carries emotional weight. And the more emotionally charged it is, the more likely it has little to do with you and everything to do with them. People don't just critique what's wrong. They react to what triggers something unresolved inside themselves. Their criticism becomes a mirror one that reflects their wounds, not your flaws. Imagine someone who constantly calls others selfish. They can't stop pointing it out in partners, coworkers, even strangers. On the surface, it seems like a judgment about others. But dig deeper. What if that person grew up feeling neglected? What if their basic emotional needs were never met? That pain creates a lens through which they now see everyone searching for signs of abandonment, betrayal, or indifference. Their criticism isn't objective. It's a projection of their history. We all carry these lenses. And the sharper someone's criticism, the more likely they're trying to fight a ghost, a past betrayal, a forgotten failure, an internal voice that once made them feel small and that now echoes every time they see someone behaving in a way that resembles it. Nietzsche understood that people often hate in others what they secretly fear in themselves. And so their critiques aren't really about what's in front of them. They're about what's inside of them. Their reactions become confessions. To read someone, don't just hear what they criticize, watch how they do it. Is it measured or intense? Calm or agitated? Do they seek truth or punishment? The tone reveals the target. And often, the target is not you. It's something long buried within them. This truth turns the tables. It transforms conflict into insight. You stop taking things personally. You start seeing criticism as a language of the unconscious, a story trying to be told. And when you respond, not with defense, but with curiosity, you learn far more than you lose. But here's the twist. The louder and more critical someone becomes, the more likely they're wearing a costume, one that covers not just fear but guilt. Because the next truth tells us that confidence itself can be a mask, a disguise worn by those trying to forget what they've done, or who they fear they might be. Truth 9. Confidence is often guilt and costume. Not all confidence is created equal. Some people enter a room and radiate presence, quiet, grounded, secure. Others demand to be noticed. They speak loudly, move fast, take up space. They seem untouchable. But Nietzsche would ask, what are they trying to cover up? True confidence whispers. False confidence performs. And often, what looks like strength is actually a carefully constructed costume tailored to conceal guilt, regret, or deep insecurity. Imagine a man who always dominates conversations. He interrupts, jokes, asserts himself constantly. People call him bold, but inside, he's running from something. Maybe shame over past failures. Maybe a fear that he's not enough unless he's the loudest. So he wraps himself in the costume of confidence, hoping the performance will drown out the guilt that won't go away. This is how guilt hides. It doesn't always look like sorrow or remorse. Sometimes it dresses up as certainty. People who carry heavy guilt often overcorrect. They project the opposite of what they feel. They become hyper-competent, hyper-social, hyper-moral, not because they're proud, but because they're trying to convince themselves they've moved on. But the body remembers. You'll see the signs in their restlessness, in the moments. When the performance cracks, when the smile disappears a second too soon, when the eyes drift for no reason, when the energy in the room shifts without warning, Nietzsche didn't see this as weakness. He saw it as a defense, a way people survive the burden of their own conscience. Because facing the truth head-on is hard. It demands reckoning. So instead, people build a version of themselves that feels powerful, untouchable, heroic even. If, deep down, they feel the opposite dot to read someone clearly, look past their performance. Ask what they're trying to prove and why. What story are they trying to replace? What part of themselves are they trying to bury? Confidence, when it's real, feels peaceful. It doesn't need applause. But when it's a costume, it seeks validation constantly. It needs to be seen, heard, admired, because underneath, something still hurts. And when that pain rises to the surface, it often finds a strange way out. Through exaggeration, through the bending of truth, through emotional outbursts that say more than they intend. That's where we're going next. Because what someone exaggerates might just be the one thing they wish they could hide forever. Truth 10. Exaggeration reveals the hidden truth. People lie, but when they exaggerate, they often reveal more than they intend. Nietzsche saw exaggeration not as deception, but as leakage truth slipping through the seams of control. Think about someone who constantly brags about how loyal they are. They bring it up in every conversation, make a show of their commitments, dramatize even the smallest gestures of support. Why the overemphasis? Often, it's not because they are exceptionally loyal. It's because they fear you won't believe they are. Or worse, because they themselves doubt it. Exaggeration is not confidence, it's overcompensation. And overcompensation is always a signal that someone is trying to silence an inner voice that says the opposite. The louder the claim, the more fragile the truth behind it. We see this everywhere. The person who insists they're over someone, yet keeps bringing them up. The one who declares they're not angry, yet their voice is shaking. The professional who won't stop talking about how humble they are. These performances are not random. They're reveals. Nietzsche believed that human beings rarely say what they mean directly. Instead, they circle it, they mask it, and sometimes they amplify it until it becomes unrecognizable. But if you look closely, you'll see that exaggeration isn't noise, it's a spotlight. It draws attention to the very things someone is trying to escape. The tone is a giveaway. When someone's words outrun their emotion, when their energy doesn't match their message, that mismatch becomes a window. Exaggeration reveals tension between who they want to be and what they actually feel. So how do you read it? Don't get lost in the performance. Step back. Ask, why do they need me to believe this so strongly? What insecurity lives beneath this insistence? Sometimes, the loudest voice in the room belongs to the person most afraid of being unheard. Sometimes the grand declarations are cover for deep uncertainty. Exaggeration is the truth trying to escape denial. And when you catch it, you glimpse the conflict beneath the surface, the tension between what's projected and what's suppressed. And that tension doesn't stop with words. It expands into actions, into habits, into the desire to control everything around them. Which leads us to the next truth. When someone desperately needs control, it usually means something inside of them is unraveling. Truth 11. Those who seek control often fear inner chaos. Control is comforting. It gives the illusion of safety, of order, of predictability. But Nietzsche urges us to look beneath that surface. Because when someone clings too tightly to control, when they micromanage every detail, when they can't relax until everything is in its place, it's rarely about the external world. It's about the storm they're trying to quiet inside. Imagine someone who obsesses over schedules, plans every conversation, needs everyone around them to follow rules. On the surface, they appear organized, disciplined, maybe even admirable. But control at that intensity is rarely peaceful. It's reactive. It's driven by a fear that if even one thing goes off course, the chaos they've been holding back will spill out. Nietzsche believed that what we seek most in the world reflects what we lack inside. The need to control others is often rooted in the inability to regulate oneself. Emotional chaos, anxiety, shame, insecurity can be so overwhelming that people begin building external systems just to contain it. They create order on the outside to avoid confronting disorder within. You'll notice it in the person who can't handle change, the one who lashes out when plans shift, who panics when routines break. Their reactions may seem extreme, but they're not reacting to the moment. They're reacting to the threat of collapse, not outwardly, but internally. What they're really afraid of is losing control of themselves. This fear can manifest in relationships too. The partner who's jealous, possessive, monitoring every move. What if they're not trying to trap the other person, but trying to anchor their own emotional instability? Their need for control is not about dominance. It's about desperation. To read this clearly, look at how flexible someone is when faced with uncertainty. Do they adapt? Or do they tighten their grip? Do they become curious or controlling? The answer reveals whether control is a preference or a shield. And here's the paradox. The more someone tries to control the world, the less control they often have over themselves. Their obsession becomes their confession. They are telling you, without words, that something inside is loud, unstable, afraid, which brings us to the final truth in this chapter. If control is a mask for chaos, then performance, especially the loud, dramatic kind, is often an echo of emptiness. And the louder the show, the quieter the soul beneath it. Truth 12. The louder the performance, the emptier the core. Some people light up a room. They command attention. Their voice fills the space. Their energy floods the atmosphere. At first, it seems magnetic confidence, charisma, charm. But Nietzsche invites us to pause, to look beyond the volume and ask what's missing underneath. Because not all performance is celebration. Sometimes it's compensation. When someone is always on, always proving, always performing, they may not be full of self-belief. They may be trying to drown out what they don't want to hear inside themselves. It's like a stage play. Bright lights, grand gestures, dramatic speeches. But behind the curtain, the stage is hollow. No foundation, no rest. Only exhaustion. That's the emotional state of someone who's built their identity on being impressive rather than being whole. You see it in the over-the-top achiever, the person who must always win, always be praised, always be recognized. Or the eternal entertainer, never serious, always joking, terrified of silence. These are not signs of joy. They're often signs of inner emptiness trying to be filled by applause. Nietzsche saw this pattern clearly. He knew that the human ego, when unsure of itself, doesn't go quiet. It gets loud, it performs. It demands attention to avoid introspection, because silence would mean sitting with the emptiness, and for many, that's unbearable, and the paradox is painful. The person who needs the most connection often pushes people away with their performance. Their noise becomes a wall. Their energy, a shield. Their brightness, a barrier. They are not trying to deceive. They're trying to survive. To read someone like this, don't be fooled by the surface. Watch what happens when the spotlight fades. Do they collapse? Withdraw? Seek the next audience immediately? That hunger for external energy reveals a deep lack of inner stability. Because when someone is full inside, they don't need to be loud. They can be still. They can be silent. They can let others shine. But when the core feels hollow, the performance becomes relentless, because stopping would mean facing the void. And now we reach a turning point. We've explored the masks, the fears, the false strength, and the empty performances. But beneath all of this lies something even more personal: beliefs, formed not from thought, but from pain. Get ready to enter the third and final layer, the heart's confession, where childhood wounds, hidden envy, and deep longing take the stage. Think about the celebrities we once admired for their unstoppable energy, their magnetic charm, their endless smiles. Robin Williams made the world laugh, but behind the scenes, he was quietly drowning in depression. His performance was not just talent, it was armor. It was a shield against the weight he carried inside. And when that shield cracked, the world was stunned. Because we only saw the light, we missed the pain it was hiding. His story isn't rare, it's just visible. There are countless others, leaders, artists, creators, who seem to have it all, yet live with a haunting emptiness. Their outward confidence was never the truth. It was the performance. The real truth was what they couldn't say, what they couldn't stop feeling. And this is the lesson Nietzsche left behind. The louder the brilliance, the deeper we must look, not to judge, but to understand. Because the ones who shine the brightest may be doing it not to be seen, but to avoid being seen too clearly. If fear is the music playing beneath every word and gesture, then behavior is the melody, the shape that fear takes. And if you listen closely, you'll realize something extraordinary. The heart always sings its truth. It doesn't lie. It confesses, even when the person doesn't know it. Now, let us enter the final chapter, where words fall away and the human heart speaks through old wounds, forgotten patterns, and silent longings. Truth 13. No one speaks from logic, they speak from pain. People like to believe they are rational, that their opinions, their choices, their judgments are shaped by facts and reason. But Nietzsche cuts through that illusion. He believed that logic is not the source, it's the spokesperson. The real author of our words is emotion. And more often than not, that emotion is pain. Imagine a heated argument. Two people exchanging sharp, calculated words. On the surface, it sounds like a battle of ideas. But listen closely. What's fueling their tone, their urgency, their refusal to bend? It's not logic, it's something older. A wound, an unmet need, a past hurt that's never been healed. People don't just share their opinions, they defend their scars. A man who grew up ignored may now insist his ideas be heard, no matter how forcefully. A woman who once felt powerless may argue with a fire that comes not from strategy, but from survival. Their reasons are real, but the energy behind them, the depth of their commitment that comes from pain. Nietzsche understood this deeply. He saw that every sentence is layered. On top is logic, what sounds convincing. Beneath that is belief, what we think we know. And beneath that is pain, what we've felt and never forgotten. We don't speak to explain, we speak to release, to protect, to be seen, and often to not feel alone in our suffering. This is why some conversations never resolve. You think you're debating facts, but you're not. You're brushing up against someone's hidden wound. And no amount of logic can fix what was never rational to begin with. To read someone, truly read them. Listen not just to their argument, but to their emotional rhythm. Are they speaking from curiosity or from defense? Are they trying to share or trying to shield? The difference is everything. And here's the twist. When you recognize this in others, you begin to hear it in yourself. The moments you've argued not to win, but to feel safe. The opinions you've clung to, not because they're true, but because they guard something vulnerable inside you. Because in the end, we're not logical creatures who sometimes feel. We're emotional beings who occasionally use logic to explain the feelings we don't yet understand. And if pain is the true author of our speech, then how someone reacts to the pain of others reveals everything about their strength or their fear. Let's explore that next. Truth 14. How someone reacts to weakness reveals their power. It's easy to be kind when people are strong, confident, and composed. But Nietzsche tells us the true measure of a person is revealed when they're faced with weakness, not their own, but someone else's. How do they respond to someone who is struggling? To someone vulnerable, ashamed, insecure? That moment is the real test. Because weakness, especially in others, triggers what lies dormant within us. It can summon compassion, or it can awaken judgment. Watch closely. When someone sees another person cry, do they lean in or recoil? When someone admits failure, do they offer reassurance or respond with silence? Some people can't tolerate weakness because it reminds them of their own. They mock it. They harden against it. They say things like, "Man up," or "Stop being so sensitive," not out of strength, but out of fear. A fear that if they allow space for someone else's vulnerability, they might have to face their own. Nietzsche saw this response as a mirror. The stronger the rejection of weakness, the deeper the unresolved pain. True power doesn't panic. In the presence of fragility, it holds space, it listens, it allows, because true strength is not dominance, it's containment. It's the ability to witness someone else's unraveling without needing to run or fix or attack. Think of the leader who lifts others instead of competing with them. The friend who doesn't try to change your emotions, just sits with you through them. The partner who lets you fall apart and stays anyway. That is strength, not because it resists emotion, but because it embraces it. And here's the subtle signal to watch for. Does someone become more present when others are vulnerable, or do they become less? Do they shrink from weakness, or grow toward it? Do they use it as a reason to criticize, or as an invitation to connect? Because how someone responds to weakness tells you everything about the relationship they have with their own. And if they reject it in others, chances are they've buried it in themselves. But sometimes, the reaction to weakness isn't rejection, it's obsession, a hunger to be seen, to be remembered, to never disappear. Which brings us to the next. Truth, when someone fears being forgotten, they don't stay quiet. They chase the spotlight, even if it burns. Truth 15, when someone fears being forgotten, they chase attention. At first, it looks like ambition, the drive to be noticed, the constant sharing, posting, performing. But Nietzsche would ask you to look deeper, because behind many attention-seeking behaviors is not vanity, it's fear. A fear of vanishing, of not mattering, of being invisible in a world that forgets people fast. We all want to be seen. That's human. But when the need becomes relentless, when someone constantly interrupts, always brings the conversation back to themselves, posts every thought, every moment, every angle, it's often because they are haunted by a question. If I stop performing, will anyone care? Nietzsche saw attention as a substitute for meaning. When people don't feel valued for who they are, they try to become valuable through visibility. If I can be seen enough, liked enough, followed enough, maybe I'll matter. Maybe I'll finally outrun the fear that I'm forgettable. But this chase comes at a cost. Because attention is fleeting, it never satisfies. It only amplifies the emptiness. The applause fades, the likes blur, and the person is left exactly where they began aching for connection, but surrounded by noise. You'll notice it in the stories. People tell always about how much they've done, how far they've come, how great they're doing. They're not lying. They're just trying to make you remember them, to make an impression deep enough to erase the feeling of being small, overlooked, or irrelevant. And sometimes that need becomes so consuming, they begin to reshape themselves into whatever gets noticed. They lose authenticity. They become a collage of attention-grabbing traits, louder, bolder, more extreme, not because it's who they are, but because it keeps them from disappearing. To read someone clearly, ask, are they speaking to share or to be seen? Are they showing up or showing off? And what would happen if no one watched? Would they still do it? Would they still be themselves? Because when someone fears being forgotten, they don't slow down. They speed up. They shine brighter. They make noise not to celebrate, but to drown out the silence they're afraid will come. And when that fear mixes with something else, envy, the result becomes even more revealing. Because what happens when someone sees in you the thing they wish they could be? The next truth pulls us into that dark, often hidden emotion, envy, disguised as attack. Truth 16. The person they attack is often the person they envy. Criticism is easy. Judgment is automatic. But Nietzsche points to a deeper reason behind some of the most intense personal attacks people make. Envy. Not the envy we admit, the subtle, quiet kind. The envy we bury, disguise, and deny. And more often than not, we direct it at the people who reflect what we feel we lack. When someone shines, others often shrink. Not because the person has done something wrong, but because their light exposes what others have dimmed inside themselves. The one who attacks your confidence might be struggling with deep insecurity. The one who questions your success might be bitter about their own failures. The one who mocks your vulnerability might long for the courage to show their own. Envy is rarely expressed as admiration. It hides beneath sarcasm, criticism, dismissal. It rewrites the story, turns achievement into arrogance, authenticity into attention-seeking, strength into manipulation. Not because those things are true, but because they make the envy easier to live with. Nietzsche saw envy not as evil, but as a confession. When someone tears you down, they are often revealing their deepest desire. The attack is a mask, and beneath it is longing, a longing to feel what you feel, to be what you are, to live how you live. You'll notice it in the way they speak about others. The people they resent most often mirror their unrealized potential. They don't just dislike them, they fixate on them. They follow their every move, not out of interest, but out of pain. A pain that says, why not me? And here's the twist. It's not just about you. It's about something earlier. Something that started long before you arrived. Because when people envy others, they're often replaying old stories of not being chosen, not being praised, not being seen. To read someone at this level, look for intensity. Where there is unexplainable anger, bitterness, obsession, envy might be lurking. And not because they hate you, but because they wish they could be what you represent to them. But this goes even deeper. Because what if the person you're seeing is not acting from the present at all? What if they're reenacting a much older script, one written in childhood, not chosen in adulthood? That's exactly where we're heading next. Nietzsche's final truths reveal how people don't just hide pain, they live inside of it, often without even knowing. Truth 17. People act out their childhood, not their beliefs. We like to think we're shaped by reason, that our choices reflect our values, our logic, our growth. But Nietzsche didn't buy that illusion. He believed that much of what we call personality is simply memory in disguise, that we don't act from beliefs, we act from wounds. And most of those wounds come from childhood. Think about it. The man who needs constant praise may have grown up in a home where nothing he did was ever enough. The woman who fears abandonment may have been emotionally neglected as a child. The person who avoids conflict at all costs may have lived in a house where raising your voice meant danger. These behaviors aren't about now, they're echoes. They're reenactments of old survival strategies wrapped in adult language. Nietzsche saw this clearly. He believed the adult is just a more articulate child still carrying the same fears, still chasing the same unmet needs, just with better vocabulary and bigger consequences. Our adult lives become the stage where our younger selves continue their unfinished story. That's why some people repeat the same patterns over and over, the same kinds of partners, the same types of jobs, the same arguments. It's not bad luck. It's familiarity. The pain feels like home, even if it hurts, because at least it's known. And in that known space, the child inside feels oddly safe. To read someone at this depth, stop asking what they think. Start asking what they fear. What need keeps showing up unfulfilled? What reaction feels bigger than the moment? Those are signs that their inner child is at the wheel, not their rational mind. And this truth isn't about blame, it's about compassion. Because once you see that people are acting from memory, not malice, you stop taking things personally. You start seeing them as a child still trying to be loved, protected, or understood. And here's the hardest part. This applies to you too. Your fears, your triggers, your reflexes, they might not belong to who you are now, but to who you once were. And when these patterns repeat long enough, they don't stay hidden. They become obvious, predictable, even poetic. Because as Nietzsche's final truth reveals, our behavior is not just communication. It's confession, one we don't even realize we're making. Let's bring it home. Truth 18. Their patterns are a confession. People speak in patterns, not just through their words, but through their habits, reactions, relationships, choices. And Nietzsche believed that if you want to know who someone truly is, don't listen to what they say. Watch what they repeat. Because repetition is never random. It's a trail that leads straight to what a person believes about themselves, what they fear, and what they still haven't healed. The partner who always ends up in toxic relationships. The friend who always finds a way to sabotage their success. The colleague who always overworks until burnout. These aren't accidents. They're confessions written in behavior. We don't repeat what's good. We repeat what's familiar, even if it hurts. Especially if it hurts. Because that pain often feels safer than the uncertainty of change. It feels like home. And somewhere, deep down, part of us still believes that maybe this time, if we just try hard enough, the ending will be different. But Nietzsche knew better. He saw that until a person becomes conscious of their pattern, they will call it fate. They'll think the world is against them, that love never lasts, that they're just not lucky. When in truth, they're just telling the same story with different faces, different names, different scenes. And here's the power of this truth. Once you recognize someone's pattern, you don't just understand their past, you can predict their future. Not as a judgment, but as a mirror. A mirror that says, this is where you are stuck. This is what you're still trying to resolve. Reading people at this level requires presence, patience, and most of all, empathy. Because once you see someone's pattern, you've seen their most vulnerable truth. The one they didn't speak out loud. The one they might not even know they're carrying. Their pattern is their confession. It's their way of saying, this is how I've learned to survive. And once you hear that silent confession, you'll never see people the same way again. Now, you've heard all 18 truths. You've looked through the mask, traced the fear, witnessed the performance, and listened to the heart. But before we close, one final reflection remains. Let's step back, breathe, and ask, what do we do with this new awareness? That's where we go next. The conclusion awaits. You've been listening, watching, reflecting, and then it happens. A sentence echoes a little too close. A pattern sounds familiar. A truth that seemed to describe someone else suddenly feels like it's pointing at you. Maybe it's the need for control, or the fear of being forgotten. Maybe it's the way you always shrink in conflict, or the way you chase validation dressed up as ambition. And in that quiet realization, everything pauses, not because you're ashamed, but because you see yourself clearly, perhaps for the first time, not as a list of traits, but as a story you've been repeating, a survival loop, a confession written in choices. And just like that, the game changes. Reading others is no longer about power. It becomes compassion. Because if these truths live in you too, then no one is as simple as they appear. Everyone is fighting something you cannot see. And the patterns, they're not flaws. They're signals, maps, invitations. Now you know, the truth doesn't live in what people say. It lives in the pattern, in the rhythm, in the way they repeat themselves wordlessly, endlessly. The story of who they are is not told in declarations. It's told in behavior. And the heart always tells the truth even when the mouth doesn't. Now, let's take everything we've uncovered and step into the final reflection. The moment where awareness becomes power, where seeing becomes transformation. Your new superpower. You've made it. 18 truths. 18 windows into the human soul. And by now, you may feel something subtle shifting. A quiet awareness. A sharper perception. The ability to pause just long enough to see beyond the words. Beyond the mask. Beyond the performance. Because that's what this really is. Not a list of ideas, but a new way of seeing. You no longer need to guess who someone is based on what they say. You've learned to look at how they say it, when they say it, why they need to say it at all. You've seen how people confess with their patterns, how silence can be louder than words, how projection, envy, and fear live in plain sight. If you know how to recognize the signs. And now you have a power most people never develop, the ability to read beneath the surface. But here's the deeper gift. This isn't just about understanding others. It's about understanding yourself. Because every truth you've heard today is also a mirror. Every mask you've identified, you've probably worn. Every fear you've seen, you've probably felt. Every pattern you've recognized in others might be echoing in your own life. And that's not weakness. That's wisdom. Nietzsche didn't share these truths to shame humanity. He shared them to free it, to cut through the illusions we carry, not to hurt, but to heal. Because once you see clearly, you stop judging so quickly. You stop reacting so harshly. You begin to understand that everyone is carrying something. And that what seems irrational, traumatic, or cruel may just be the voice of an old wound still trying to protect itself. This awareness becomes a kind of quiet power. You walk into a room and you listen deeper. You notice what others miss. You sense the insecurity behind the arrogance, the need behind the silence, the story behind the rage. You become less reactive, more attuned, and maybe, just maybe, more compassionate, because the goal is not to manipulate people. It's not to outsmart them or predict their every move. The goal is connection, depth, empathy, to move through the world not with blind trust or blind suspicion, but with clear eyes and an open heart. So here's your invitation. Try this. The next time you speak with someone, give them your full attention. Not just their words, their tone, timing, energy. What are they avoiding? What are they exaggerating? What are they repeating? And then ask the same questions of yourself, because this is your superpower now. Not just the ability to read others, but the courage to read yourself. And if one of these 18 truths hit you harder than the rest, ask yourself why. That might just be where your own story is trying to be heard. So tell me, what truth spoke to you most, and what will you do with it?